Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. This is Sally Alsop, and I'm a member of the ICG committee. In today's webinar, you'll be hearing from Dr. Rachel Laws of Laws Consulting. Rachel is a social psychologist and one of the original founders of commercial semiotics in the UK and has been practicing commercially for 20 years. She has been delivering training in semiotics and related methods for the Market Research Society, as well as the ICG and various other groups for more than 10 years now. Rachel has also recently been made a Fellow of the Market Research Society. Her talk today will be about the use of semiotics in market research. She'll be describing how semiotics is not just a research method, but quite a large set of tools for thinking and generating new ideas. She has recently published a book on the subject entitled Using Semiotics in Marketing, and ICG members and others attending this webinar can save 20% off the cost price by using the code Semiotics20 when making their purchase. The code should be applied at point of purchase on the Kogan page website. The code and relevant page is shown on the slide at the moment, will be shown again at the end. But I gather if you just go to the Kogan page website and search for the book, find the book, and then enter the code, that should be fine. So you don't necessarily need to copy down that long link. So Rachel loves talking about semiotics, any excuse, and she'll be very happy to answer your questions at the end. So please type them into the question box as we go through, and Rachel will address these in the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We are very grateful to Mike Harvey, Director of Talkback Studios, for sponsoring this webinar. Talkback, who run viewing studios based in Nottingham, are celebrating their 20th anniversary this year and are delighted to announce that they will be open for business again on Monday, the 6th of July. For more information, please visit talkbackstudio.co.uk. Before I hand over to Rachel, here are the next webinars in our programme, so please note these down in your diaries. Some of them are open for registration now. Also, there are still sponsorship opportunities for a couple of forthcoming webinars if anyone is interested. The cost is £100 for a lot of exposure on our website, mailers and social media, and of course on the day. So our speaker today is Dr. Rachel Laws from Laws Consulting, and I'll now hand over to Rachel.
Hi everybody. Can you all see my screen okay?
I can see it. That looks fine. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right then. Hi everybody. Thank you so much for spending time with me this morning. I have special love for independent consultants because I've been one for a long time, and I guess one of the reasons why I remained an independent consultant over the last 20 years rather than joining a larger organisation was because I really value the intellectual freedom that being an independent consultant has brought to me. You know, I've never had to ask anyone's permission to write or publish, and I've got the freedom to research the topics that I think are interesting, and I've got the freedom to say the things that I want to say about the way that the world is going, and that's been an incredible luxury over the last 20 years. And I know that if you're an independent consultant, probably that freedom is something that you value as well. And so that's why this webinar and the ICG are especially important to me. And I'm going to try and say some things today that are going to be useful for all of you as independent consultants and independent researchers in our current climate, which is, you know, more than averagely difficult. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I want to talk about what we can do to try and sort of future-proof and protect our careers and make sure that we all stay in work. just briefly, in a minute, I'm going to tell you a really interesting story about consumer behaviour that I hope is going to make you laugh and think about consumer behaviour and the events in consumers' lives in a different way. But first, just for those of you who may not be familiar with semiotics already, I'm just going to say a couple of short things about what it is and also what's going on in our industry. So, semiotics, just quickly. Traditionally, in market research industry, our research methods like surveys and focus groups and that type of thing have been built on what we now call an inside-out model of research, which is to say that these techniques have been imported into market research from human psychology, and they use a psychological model to understand people. So the model says, everybody's an individual, we're all different, we've all got our own unique little personalities, and there's a lot of interesting but secret stuff going on inside of our heads. So inside our heads, we think as market researchers, people have things like attitudes, beliefs, brand preferences, needs, motivations, and all of that type of stuff locked away out of sight. And so our traditional market research tools, like sensitively designed discussion guides and projective tests and all that type of stuff, and carefully crafted survey questionnaires, have been organised with the ambition of getting all of that secret stuff out of people's heads and making it visible. Okay, and so that's become known as the kind of inside-out approach to research. In recent years, a different approach has started to make itself visible and is now quite widespread, I'm happy to say. And it is collectively known as the outside-in approach to research. So instead of trying to get all this secret stuff out of people's heads, we're instead asking, how did it get in there in the first place? Where did all these attitudes and beliefs and preferences and needs and motivations come from? From the point of view of the outside-in approach, the answer is assumed to be that they come from the surrounding culture of which your individual consumer has no choice but to be a part. And so there's a collection of research methods, prominently including semiotics, also ethnography when it's done well, and also discourse analysis, which I'll say more about another time. And all of these methods take culture, consumer culture, as the primary thing that we're trying to research. So I guess that's my headline on what you need to know about semiotics. So it's a method for studying consumer culture. And if you know anything about semiotics, you've probably run into the idea of signs and symbols, haven't you? So you probably, like, we could look at this image that you're looking at right now, for example, and we could observe that it's made up of a whole bunch of signs and symbols. We've got what appears to be a female figure in the center here. We've got this particular color palette of reds and oranges and purples. We've got what appears to be a kind of city landscape. We've got the quite a futuristic one actually, and we've got the rather kind of brave pose of this figure as they appear ready to kind of take on this futuristic urban environment. And then added to that, we've got things like fonts. So I carefully selected a sans serif font, which is a conventional way to suggest modernity. And then additionally, we've got things like company logos and things like that down at the bottom as well. So you've probably run into the idea of signs and symbols already, and this is perhaps step one of doing semiotics. There's a lot more to semiotics than that, and actually the more you get into semiotics, the more exciting it becomes. And there's a whole bunch of analysis, techniques and ways of thinking that don't often get talked about, which tell you how to connect these small signs and symbols to large-scale social trends. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, and also there's loads of instruction, practical instruction about this in the book as well. So in a minute, I'm going to talk to you about signs and symbols and how they kind of ruin someone's wedding. But first, let me just say a few words about what's going on in the marketing and market research industry. So we've got a problem on our hands, don't we? There, first of all, there's a pandemic. So for a lot of us, that means for us qualitative researchers, it's been very difficult for us to go out and meet consumers in person as we used to do. Although I'm really glad to see that things like focus group facilities are starting to open up. I actually like focus groups. I quite like group discussions because they're an opportunity for consumers to talk to each other as well as the moderator, and I always think that that's a useful way to get at day linguistic habits that consumers show that are full of valuable insight. Nonetheless, the pandemic has caused us a few problems, hasn't it, as an industry? And I think that also it's accelerated a trend that was already happening, which involved, first of all, digitization. So what I mean by that is things like setting up WhatsApp groups, for example, of consumers and then interviewing them or really just firing questions at them about their sort of consumer attitudes and behavior using these digital platforms. Now, that's all well and good. And again, I'm actually a big fan of digital culture. But one issue with this is, as I'm sure you know, if you're a sort of traditional qualitative researcher, especially an independent researcher, is that what this leads to is clients taking their market research in-house, right? Because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of barriers, you know, you can kind of see it from the client's point of view, you know, if market research is really no more important or complex than just asking people some questions and collating the answers, no wonder our clients are increasingly thinking that they can do that themselves, and that sort of leaves the traditional independent researchers out in the cold. So what can we do, you know, if we're no longer the custodians of information, if it's really simple and straightforward for people who used to buy market research to collect information themselves, what are we going to do about that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have original ideas, and we're going to have to become capable of interpreting information and data in an attention-getting way and tell memorable stories that make client-side marketers sit up and pay attention and remember the things that you said. So in other words, what we need is we need to deliver this new stuff. We need to deliver original ideas, creative thinking. We need to develop the ability to tell memorable stories about what's going on with consumers. And the reason why I'm so passionate about semiotics is because it offers you a framework for thinking and a set of practical tools for achieving exactly that, okay? And so that's why I'm excited about it. And I wrote this book because I want other researchers actually and marketers to share in the sheer excitement and joy of semiotics when you realize what it can do. There's so much more to it than just kind of picking apart ads and packaging. It will really equip you with a set of tools that enable you to say insightful and ultimately strategic things about the way we live now. So there you go. That's my kind of pitch about why you should care about semiotics. And what I want to do now is just tell you a little story about what's going on with consumers at the moment in one area of their lives that exemplifies why I'm excited about semiotics and why my clients are excited about it. So let's talk about that now. Oh yeah, all right, here's a quick action plan for you before we get onto the story. Here's what we're going to do. I do this all the time, okay? So for me, research doesn't begin with a brief coming in. Research begins when I observe consumers doing unusual things, which they do all the time, thankfully. They're full of quirks and weird behavior. So for me, research will begin when I notice people behaving in a strange way. And I will then go ahead and investigate that phenomenon using semiotic tools and tools for thinking and concepts, which this book is absolutely stuffed full of them that you can start using straight away. And then that will enable me to tell clients an engaging story and show them a version of the world that they've never seen before. That's what, and I want to be able to share that ability with you. So here's a story then. This is exactly how my working life works, right? I'll notice something interesting happening and then I'll tackle it as a semiotic problem. So here's a story for you, just quickly. So in 2018, something really kind of unusual and quite funny happened. There was this bride-to-be, this woman who was planning her wedding in the United States, and she was planning to have her wedding at a fancy venue in Hawaii. And she issued a set of instructions to her guests. And those instructions were unusually demanding, so demanding that this set of instructions was leaked to social media and it went viral. And it really went viral. It spread all over the world. It appeared on Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, and all those platforms. And then the traditional news media picked it up as well. So what was it that this woman did that was so strange? Well, the main thing that people focused on was the dress code. So this woman issued these instructions to her guests with a very strict dress code that was organised by sex, but also by weight. rather shockingly. So women weighing under 160 pounds were told that they needed to wear a very brightly coloured and expensively attired outfit. As a matter of fact, let me just come to the next slide and see if I've got a picture for you. Here's a picture of the dress code, which I mocked up using the video game The Sims. So what you've got here is the bride there standing under the arch. She's wearing the attire that was prescribed for women under 160 pounds. So women were told that they had to wear Louboutin shoes. Those are the very expensive shoes with the red soles. That they were expected to wear orange suede trousers, an interesting choice for Hawaii, where it's obviously going to be hot, and what she described as a green velvet sweater. And then for men weighing under 200 pounds, they were instructed to wear a kind of purple and white and black outfit, exactly as you see here, with the addition of a soda hat. A soda hat is a hat that has cans of soda attached to it and a plastic straw that goes into your mouth. What about people who are heavier than the bride thought was correct? Well, if you're a woman and you weigh 161 pounds or above, you were informed that you needed to shroud yourself in black from head to toe and stay away from the synchronized dancing, which was going to take place on the beach and be recorded. And men who were over 200 pounds were instructed that they had to dress themselves completely in camouflage, and they also were excluded from this dance. Now, there was widespread fury. I think you can guess why. There was widespread indignation and also laughter and mockery on the part of all the worldwide audience who saw this story on social media. The guests themselves were tremendously upset, and then the bride was upset when this story was leaked and everybody laughed. So there's a certain point where pretty much everybody was angry. And it's easy to see that in what way this person was being unreasonable, okay? But because, I mean, this immediately kind of had I immediately went, you know, there was like my semiotics radar kicked into action, and I really wanted to investigate and find out what was going on. So rather than just join in the kind of chorus of people saying this is totally unreasonable, I wanted to have a look at what was happening. Here's a few more details of what she was asking for. So that's a soda hat up there on the left. That's what the men were invited to wear. Women were told that their outfit needed to include a Burberry scarf. And some fashion bloggers at the time actually noticed as well that this was a very expensive outfit that she was asking for. So the shoes were going to come in at about $700. The scarf was going to start at about $400. People were initially additionally told that they had to change into a separate outfit for the evening party, and that the outfit for the evening should have a value of at least $1,000 all by itself. All right. So we can see that there's something kind of unusual going on there. Now, what I want to say about this is that this woman, although she was kind of a bit tactless, was actually joining in with a larger trend where budget for weddings shot up in the United States, shot up by a whopping 75% in 1 year. So if you're interested, British weddings now are costing in the region of £30,000. A wedding in the United States costs somewhere in the region of $44,000. And as an interesting kind of product of that, parents now are being required to fund people's weddings in a way that we haven't seen in several decades. So it used to be that over the last several decades that most young couples had taken on the responsibility of funding their own weddings. And this was because people get married much later, women are almost universally out at work, and it was common for people to live together before getting married, and so there was the reasons for parents to pay for this stuff had almost vanished. But these wedding budgets have gone through the roof, and young couples can't fund it all. And so what's happening now is that we're seeing that Bank of Mum and Dad is being increasingly called on to help foot the bill for these kind of extravagant events. So what's the connection between these two things? What's the connection between this particular woman setting all these stringent requirements on her guests about who wears what and how much you're allowed to weigh, And these skyrocketing wedding budgets. Well, I want to say that we can find the answer using semiotics. Okay, so semiotics, amongst other things, well, principally perhaps, is the study of representation. It's the study of the way that consumers and brands as well represent reality and therefore kind of shape reality. So I can tell you exactly what was on that woman's mind when she put together this list of requirements and when she invented this complicated itinerary that involved the people in coloured outfits doing synchronised dancing on the beach. I'll tell you what she was thinking about. She was thinking about video and she was thinking about photography. She was thinking about her Facebook account and she was thinking about her Instagram account. That is, I'm sure she was thinking about the important event that is marriage, which obviously has, you know, it's a legal contract and it has serious lifelong consequences, including economic consequences. And let's be fair to her, I'm sure that she was also thinking about the how meaningful it would be to share this important life-changing moment with her family and friends. But apparently, if her instructions to her guests are anything to go by, what she was thinking about most of all was the visual product of this wedding. She was thinking about the video, the photos, these things which last a long time, things, measures by which her wedding would be judged and compared to the weddings of her peers. And so one way in which kind of semiotics aligns itself with the priorities of modern day consumers is this focus on representation. That bride was very concerned with representation, the way that her wedding would look, because the way that her wedding would look was of paramount importance, because that's the way that culture is organised now. Now, I think it's really interesting, just briefly, I want to say something about millennials, all right? It's been observed for a really long time that millennials like certain things, you know, they like sustainability, for example. And so that has made itself felt in trends in weddings in recent years in some of the ways that you see here on the left of the photo. Right? So it's produced things like rustic wooden signs at the entrances to weddings welcoming people to the event, or what we've got here are mason jars with bits of hessian tied around them in an attempt to kind of look rustic, and it could result in kind of hessian bows on the back of chairs and weddings taking place in barnyards and things like that. So there's this big rustic theme, kind of back to basics theme, which is pretty much what you would expect of millennials, which are a generation who've been credited with a lot of concern with sustainability and reduction of waste and recycling and things like that. And yet at the same time, when we look at those skyrocketing wedding budgets and when we look at the sort of products that wedding suppliers are being asked to provide, there's also and simultaneously this massive emphasis on the spectacular. So wedding cakes, for example, are larger than they've ever been. They may be dressed, some of them may be dressed up in a kind of rustic way with sort of, you know, unfinished icing and things like that. But they're huge. They might be called, oh, this is my naked wedding cake, but it's enormous. It's like 4 times the size of previous types of cake. Dresses as well have become enormous, and things like the number of bridesmaids that people have, you know, we only need to go back about, let's say, 15 or 20 years to find that it was common for people to have 1 or 2 or 3 bridesmaids. The average number of bridesmaids now in an Anglo-American wedding is 8. That's a lot of bridesmaids. Why is that? Because it looks great in the photos. That's why, because it looks really good in the photos. If you've got 8 women in identical frocks, then you can do creative things with your photography and arrange them in different ways and things like that. And in addition, there's been a load of other new things that have been introduced into weddings that simply weren't there before. So we've got things like flower walls, which are very expensive to achieve, which is what it sounds like. It's a wall of flowers that the young couple can stand in front of to have their photographs taken. And then also another new thing is the mini moon. So if you don't know what that is, that's a honeymoon which takes place shortly before the wedding, and you have that as well as your actual honeymoon, which comes after the wedding. So on the one hand, we've got this kind of theme of the rustic and emphasis on things that look natural and not too processed. And at the same time, and amongst the same people, we've got this huge rocketing expenditure on things which are there to achieve a visual effect, because everybody wants their wedding to be more spectacular than the previous wedding. So what I noticed then with this woman with her list of demands was that she was unusual in the sense that she was so blunt about how much people were allowed to weigh. But she was not unusual in many of these other respects. She was actually really conforming quite obediently to wedding trends which currently apply. And being able to, when you look at this woman's demands and she says things like, you've got to have the Louboutin shoes with the red soles, those shoes are a status symbol. That brand is a status symbol. It's absolutely a symbol of wealth and, in a sense, prosperity, you know. And when she rather tactlessly told people who were older and heavier that they needed to shroud themselves and get out of the way of the camera, it might have been a bit rude of her, but she was kind of doing her best to conform to what she saw as the requirements for having a successful wedding, which is that everybody should look beautiful in a conventional way, and the photographs should look like professional film sets, and so on and so on. And so the reason why you want to take an interest in this stuff, when you see a consumer say something like, well, you know, it's very important for everybody at my wedding to have these particular type of shoes, and you're thinking, well, what are they talking about? Semiotics will help you to connect the semiotic sign, such as, for example, the red soles of the shoes, to larger social trends, such as the increasing kind of dominance of everything that is visual and spectacular, and then connect that to business, which is these skyrocketing wedding budgets. And that means that if your client, since we're talking independent researchers, if your client is interested in selling wedding stuff to people, this is really valuable information, because people are throwing their money around like there's no tomorrow. And it's a business opportunity that you can get in on. And that bit of strategic advice starts with an observation of one single person being a bit objectionable about weighty shoes and specifying that people need to have shoes with red soles. Okay. Now, since I wrote this book in 2019, this was just pre the pandemic, and quite a lot of people have asked me since then, but what about the pandemic? You know, surely this is going to bring these huge spectacular weddings to an end, doesn't it? Well, actually, for anybody who's kind of has a brand which is at all relevant to the weddings industry, I'm happy to tell you it's not making a lot of difference. I've been taking quite an interest in how engaged couples are coping with this type of stuff. And the way that they're reacting is this. There's now a new thing, along with the mini moon, which is the pre-wedding holiday, if you can get one. There's now something called a mini money, which means a miniature wedding ceremony, which takes place now, followed by the wedding ceremony of your dreams to take place in 2021. So essentially, we've got even more spending. People are now going to have 2 weddings instead of 1, because they cannot bear to think that coronavirus has cheated them out of the event of a lifetime. So we're going to see a lot of weddings, big weddings, happening in 2021, and that's going to mean there's going to be a lot of pressure on venues and other types of wedding suppliers, caterers and people like that, florists and dressmakers, and as a result, prices are going to go up. And so that's the kind of state of the wedding industry this year and next year. Right, so let's see what I've got for you on the next page if I can. There we go. So just to summarize then, this is what I do every day as part of doing semiotics. This is kind of how it works in my everyday life, right? So I will observe something interesting going on amongst consumers. I've really got a sharp radar for consumers doing interesting things. And as soon as I spot somebody behaving in a way that's a bit unusual or attention-getting or different, new and different, I will then take that phenomenon, break it down into some semiotic signs and symbols, like the shoes with the red soles, or the massive wedding cakes, or the idea that only people with certain types of bodies are allowed to appear on camera. The next step then is that I'll take those individual semiotic signs and connect some dots. I'll look for how those how those individual semiotic signs connect to larger trends, like wedding budgets that increased 75% in a single year in the United States. And then I'll tell a story, or craft a story for my clients that tells them this is how you can organize your marketing strategy in a way that is responding to the needs that your consumers are expressing. In this case, a need to manufacture visual products which will last much longer than the events which they describe. That's about all from me in the terms of presenting, although we're going to have a bit of a discussion in just a moment. I want to let you know that this new book is here for you, okay? I strongly, I love semiotics with all my heart. I want other people to have the same joy from it that I've had, you know, and also the same career opportunities, because it will equip you with the ability to say interesting things to clients from now until kingdom come, okay? And for a long time, there were barriers to entry with semiotics. People were saying it's too difficult, there's too much theory, it uses long words. This book is here to put an end to that, okay? It's written in very straightforward language. You don't need a degree in social science. If you've got a basic grasp of marketing, you can do this, all right? This book is a self-contained course for researchers and marketers. It's got loads of brands and case studies. It's full of practical activities, and it's available on Amazon. But if you go to koganpage.com and type in either my name, Laws, L-A-W-E-S, or the word semiotics, the book will come up, and you can use the code that you see right there to get 20% off the cover price. And that's all from me in terms of presenting. Let's have a chat.
That was fantastic, really interesting talk. Many thanks, Rachel. We've got a few questions coming through now. So please type in your questions, everybody, into your question box on the panel. First question, Rachel, what's your view on the growing trend of using videos on professional networking sites in LinkedIn, i.e., for example, on LinkedIn?
It's a really interesting question. No one's asked me that before. Yeah, okay. So I think, all right, as digital culture becomes more and more dominant and more the norm, if you look at the number of hours that people are spending online each day, digital culture is competing with what we might call the real world in a very successful way. And that means that we, especially during this lockdown, we've all spent much more time looking at things on a screen than we have spent looking at people face to face, haven't we? And so I think the emergence and increased popularity of video is a pretty successful attempt to put human faces back into digital culture, because for a long time digital culture was principally about text, so people making tweets or writing comments on internet forums, and it was also about still images like memes and things like that, which I could talk about another time. But I think the rise of video on platforms like LinkedIn is a reflection of an attempt to put human life, human faces, voices, human facial expressions and things like that back into, or introduce them into digital culture, so that we can capture each other's attention in a more human way.
That's great. Can semiotics be used also in a B2B context? Have you got any experience of working and using it?
So much, so much. I'll just tell you a quick story about this briefly. So I did some work for a financial services organisation, and they wanted to target entrepreneurs, and so they hired me to do some linguistic analysis, which is actually a big part of semiotics that doesn't get talked about enough, to have a look at how entrepreneurs were using language to construct their own version of reality. And I did this analysis across multiple different countries, and here's what I found, okay? So if you want to do a global marketing campaign for entrepreneurs, yes, there are some things that make them all the same. And that thing is that they all know that they are special. Every entrepreneur knows that they are a special person, all right? And that belief, self-belief, is reinforced through things like they're constantly being invited to sort of give interviews to Forbes and those sorts of business platforms, right? So they get a lot of attention and they're told that they're special. So, and they believe that, they take that on board. So if you want to target entrepreneurs globally, that's the way that you do it. However, having said that, there are also some conspicuous differences in the talk of entrepreneurs in different parts of the world. So they all use their own local cultures, local ideologies and beliefs to inform their understanding about what entrepreneurship is. So the American entrepreneurs, for example, they had this kind of twin style of talk where it was two-pronged, if you like. So one prong was about dreams. It was about keep reaching for that rainbow, you know, follow your dreams, and if you keep at it, then all your dreams will eventually come true. And I think we can recognise this as a kind of distinctively American thing, right? It's the American dream, in fact, is the word for it, isn't it? At the same time, the other prong of the American talk had to do with pain and suffering. So you doubtless heard the expression "no pain, no gain." So there's this kind of Protestant work ethic in there, and this idea that rewards don't come until you've kind of suffered and sacrificed for them. So that was the American entrepreneurs. They talk about pain followed by dreams coming true. The Chinese entrepreneurs were very keen to talk about family. So they would say things like, where there's a successful entrepreneur, there's a stable family standing behind them. And this was something that was not really evident at all in the American style of talk. And then there's the Scandinavian entrepreneurs, owners of Spotify and these sorts of brands. And their characteristic way of talking concerned collaboration and cooperation. So it's very common for them to say things like, yes, I'm an entrepreneur. Yes, almost by definition, that means doing things on your own and going out on a limb. However, still, despite all of that, we're all in this together. So my competitors are not yet all right, they're technically competitors, but they're also colleagues. And if we all work together, and if we can kind of get past anxiety about rivals, then we can make the world a better place. So that's a pretty good example of how semiotics, which is really the study of culture and how people make meaning for themselves and shape reality based on ideas that are local to their culture. That's quite a good example of that, and it very much applies in B2B as well as B2C.
Okay, that's great. So another question. Hi, Rachel, super webinar, thank you. Can you give us a couple of examples of where semiotics has identified insight for your clients that wouldn't have emerged without the semiotics?
Yeah, I think this happens all the time, really. I mean, the classic case study is rebranding Charmin, and if you don't know about this case study, it was a foundational case study that helped to establish semiotics as a discipline. I did that research, and you can find it on the original paper which I published with my client, SCA Tissue, can be found on walk.com, that's the World Advertising Research Centre, or you can email me and I'll send you a copy. Or you can buy the book where there's an updated account of that. The whole of chapter 2 of my book concerns this business case study, which is the key thing about that case study was the element of surprise for the client. So I'll just try to describe this really briefly, okay? So my client was a really lovely company, Swedish paper company called SCA Tissue, now known as Essity, and they make various household paper goods, like they are the owners of Plenty Kitchen Towels, for example, and also Velvet Toilet Roll, which at the time was the #2 brand in the UK. And they're only a smallish company, and they became very excited when they had the opportunity to acquire the European license to the toilet paper brand, which at the time was known as Charmin, which has still sold in the United States as Charmin and has a picture of the bear on the front. It's a very much loved brand. It was at the time of sale, it was worth about 90 million in the UK. And what was interesting about it, given that toilet roll is normally considered to be a low engagement category, is that Charmin loyalists were really intensely loyal to their brand. Okay. Now, what was interesting about this, as much as SCA Tissue were really kind of excited and gleeful about this purchase, it came with really draconian conditions attached. And so P&G said, well, you can have this brand, but you've got to strip it of all its brand assets. So you've got to change the name, you've got to stop using the Charmin bear, and you can't talk about absorbables technology. So you've got to strip all these assets out of the brand. And so SCA said to themselves, right, well, this is a situation because we're going to have to rebrand. And so they took, rather interestingly, they took two different strategies. So in the Germany, they decided to subsume Charmin under Zhuo, which was the local power brand. And then in the UK, they decided to create a new brand. Now, they took advice from Millward Brown about how rebranding was going to affect their business, and Millward Brown said it's going to be bad. You can expect loss of brand recognition. Sales are predicted to drop by 20%. They will take 3 to 4 years to recover. And what actually happened was that SCA in both countries did some focus groups at an early stage, showed consumers some ideas like, we're going to rebrand, this is what we're thinking of doing, and it was a bad situation. So those loyal customers were pretty angry and hostile and upset and strongly objected to the rebranding process. So that made SCA kind of nervous, you know. So they went ahead anyway because they had to. They brought Charmin under the power brand Zhuo in Germany, and things happened exactly as Millward Brown said they would. So they endured a 21% loss of sales, so Millward Brown were absolutely on point. So their prediction was correct within 1%. Okay, and it panned out exactly as they expected, and it took a long time to recover. In the UK, SCA rather bravely at that time, because Semiotics was still quite new, decided to use Semiotics to help create a new brand, which you may now know as Kushel, which has a koala bear on the front of the pack. And so what do we do with Semiotics? Well, we used Semiotics principally in 2 ways, right? First of all, we used it to find a new brand mascot. So we wanted to, P&G said you can't use a bear. This was their lawyers, actually. They said you can't have a bear. And so we had to look for some other animals. There's a large number of other animals that we could have chosen. The one that we went with was the koala, because we did semiotic research to investigate not what koalas are actually like, because if you didn't know, koalas aren't actually that friendly. But we did some semiotic research to find out how people imagine koalas, how are koalas represented. And if you go on Google Images right now and look at koala, you'll find loads of images of people on their holidays cuddling koalas as though they're babies. And so it seems that koalas as a semiotic sign, as an idea, had a lot of meanings, like being cuddly and sweet and non-threatening and adorable, and it was kind of almost having some kind of a role in the family, that were quite similar to bears, and not at all similar to some other animals that SCA had considered using. So that was the first thing. We found a brand mascot. By the way, the P&G's lawyers said, wait a minute, is this a bear? We said, no, it's a marsupial. That was enough to satisfy them for legal purposes. The other thing that we did was to tweak the brand name. And so the thing with the recognisable Charmin name, apart from that huge C on the front, which we kept, was the soft sh sound, Charmin, which we preserved in the middle syllable of Kushel, which clearly kind of connoted softness and gentleness. And then you might also observe on the end of the word Kushel, E-double-L-E, it's the French word for woman. So it's got femininity built right into it. And this really matched well to the sorts of needs and priorities that were being expressed by the target consumer. Now, as I say, at the time, Semiotics was still quite new, and SCA Tissue were quite brave in a sense in doing this, in making a new brand at all, and then using Semiotics to create their new brand. So they were thoroughly surprised when, despite the declining performance of the brand in Germany, which was exactly what they'd been told to expect, that when they introduced Kushel and created this new brand, Kushel, sales went up. Sales went up, awareness went up, the amount of toilet roll that people were purchasing per shopping trip went up. Sales on basically every measure there is went up in a significant way. And that was a couple of years ago. And the situation that we've got now is that Kushel has substantially overtaken Velvet, and I believe now is the second most popular brand in the UK outside of retailer brands. So that right there came as a huge surprised to SCA share, and of course they were overjoyed. It's become a landmark case study in semiotics and was instrumental in many other brands in FMCG and other sectors taking it up and using it.
That's really interesting, and very much shows how semiotics can help in terms of branding. But do you have any case studies of how semiotics affected product design as opposed to the branding side of it?
Yeah, let me think about that. I mean, I do actually work on this type of stuff all the time, you know, and a lot of it's confidential because the two big areas where I work are banking and secondary pharmaceuticals. And as I'm sure you all know, listeners, you know, if you're a researcher, then the banks and the pharmaceutical companies are amongst the most protective of their market research, and they kind of really will put strict limits on the ways that you can talk about it. So I'm kind of constrained in what I can say. However, what I can say is that if you're interested in taking a look at this book, chapter 6 is a whole chapter about how to think creatively and how to innovate. And it's not just kind of vague recommendations like, I don't know, try to be more imaginative. There are quite a lot of actual concrete and specific tools in semiotics that you can use. I like to refer to it as a toolbox. So there's a technique called truisms. There's a technique called the semiotic square, which you may have heard of. When that's used well, that can be a really powerful way to spot opportunities for new products or to design existing products in a new way. So there's a bunch of actual tools that you can use to make new things, and there are a few case studies in there which I think you'll find relevant. So for example, there's some stuff in there about the development of new technology in the medical sector, which solves problems for consumers and borrows ideas from the natural world. So if you're interested, for example, if you've always thought that injections are a bit painful and scary, there are scientists right now working on innovative new tools which borrow from the biology of insects like mosquitoes, which can sting you and you don't realise. They can bite you and you don't know about it until after it's all over. And so semiotics is a tool which will open doors to that kind of new thinking, which will show you the path to new ways to think about projects or categories or sectors that we all felt were very familiar.
Okay, a couple of comments here. First of all, Alessi is a brand that uses semiotics regularly for product design, so people might want to look into that. And also a couple of people have tried already to buy your book, and they're saying that the semiotics 20 code doesn't work, so perhaps you could have a word with Kogan Page and make sure that that's working.
Okay, I absolutely will do that. Yeah, no question. That'll be the #1 thing that I do when I come off this webinar, is that I will contact Kogan Page right away and sort that out for you. And then could I ask you to disseminate the information to listeners so that they'll be able to access a working code?
Yes, yeah, I'm sure we can do that.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, a couple of last minute questions. So what is the role of in-depth ethnography or interviewing in semiotics?
Okay, it's a really interesting question. And again, so ethnography has a really close relationship to semiotics, because they're both should be focused on this question of consumer culture. And so if you're interested, guys, I dedicated a whole chapter to how to combine semiotics with ethnography and also discourse analysis. But just briefly, some of the things I'll say are as follows. So I love ethnography, and it really works well with semiotics. They really kind of go hand in hand together in a nice way. People sometimes think of semiotics as a form of desk research, and it can be that if you're especially in situations like you're under lockdown because of pandemic, you can do it that way. but there's absolutely no reason why you can't include going out and looking at things and meeting people as part of your semiotic practice. So I almost think, you know, if you're going to do some ethnography, if you're going to go out and meet consumers and go shopping with them or whatever, then why wouldn't you want to combine some semiotics with that as well? Video is a very interesting one because video usually will focus on things that move. And so what you will have is people displaying body language, and also it's conventionally used to capture behavioural routines, like let's watch somebody doing their laundry or making a sandwich or whatever it may be. And what you can see in those videos, or what I can see when I look at them from a semiotic point of view, is people manipulating semiotic signs. So, for example, the way that they store and keep their products, what kinds of things do they think need to go in the fridge and what kinds of things don't, you know, what kinds of things are sort of thrown behind the washing machine in the utility room, and what kinds of things are kept in a basket at the front, what kinds of quantities do people use, you know, will tell you something about how they understand the efficacy or also the gentleness of a product. So when I look at people behaving, which is what ethnographic videos are often about, then what I'm observing with my semiotic hat on is people physically manipulating semiotic signs in order to achieve certain kinds of effects, which actually is not just clean clothes or a sandwich, it's also about things like caring for the family, which is so crucially important. And then things like interviews. You'll hear me talk about this in the book, but I'm not. Structured interviews are nice from the point of view of making the client feel reassured that you've covered off the topics that matter to them, but they can be an impediment to natural conversation. And so here's my hot tip, okay? If you're an independent researcher, you're going to become an expert in semiotics, is just allow yourself to enjoy that intellectual freedom I was talking about at the beginning, okay? If you're going to do semiotics, there's everything to be said for talking to consumers. I love talking to consumers, but I try to avoid doing structured interviews, because what it will do is just impose your version of reality on the consumer, and it suppresses the consumer's version of reality, which is what we're trying to get at, okay? So I argue fervently for naturalistic conversations. So when I spend time with consumers, which I do all the time, I will avoid going in there with a list of set questions. I've usually got an idea of, obviously I've got an idea of what kinds of topics I'm interested in hearing about, but my number one priority is to get to know the consumer and let them talk to me in a way that is natural for them, and let them share with me what version of reality they have installed. Because if we already knew what version of reality they were using, we wouldn't need to go out and meet them, would we? So that's my take on interviewing. Do I interview? Not really. Do I spend time talking to consumers? Yeah, a hell of a lot of time. Yeah, I love talking to consumers, and if you're nice to them and you just listen and let them lead the conversation, they will show you everything you want to know about how things pan out in their world and their everyday life.
Okay, probably the last question, or two questions, sort of linked questions. Most times people are on the street unedited, no makeup, not typically what's considered polished and professional. Can you add the polished versus not polished context, please?
Oh, I'm not quite sure. Could you say that again for me?
So most times people are on the street unedited, no makeup, not typically what is considered polished and professional. Can you add the polished versus not polished context, please?
Yeah, that's a really nice insight. That's a really, really nice insight. People often have kind of two versions of themselves, don't they? You know, there's the version of you. I mean, honestly, if you could see me, it's quite hot here today in London, and I've got the window closed and the fan off to reduce noise on this microphone. So I'm sweaty right now, okay? I've got a red face and I'm sweaty and I don't look very, very attractive. But had this this webinar involved my being on camera, I probably would have gone to a lot of trouble to put sweat-proof makeup on and that kind of stuff to tone down my complexion and make myself look presentable in a conventional way. And I think that the general public also are doing that as well. And so if you want to talk about why is ethnography valuable, or why is it valuable to go out and meet consumers in the places where they live, that's why. It's because there's the way that people present themselves on an average day is kind of a bit different to the way that they will polish themselves up and present themselves to the world in these long-lasting visual representations like their Instagram accounts. Now, I will just say on while we're discussing that there's an interesting plot twist here, right, which is that I've noticed a new kind of behavior recently on Instagram where some of these influencers who get paid to look gorgeous and display their aspirational lifestyles have started posting photos which exist to expose the polished and constructed nature of their normal stuff. So what I mean by that is that you might have an influencer, let's say a fashion influencer, and she will make a post on Instagram which shows two photos side by side, and on the left hand side there'll be the sort of photo you'd expect to see where she looks very thin and beautiful and she's got perfect skin and her hair's just right and there are no wrinkles in her jumper and that type of thing. And then on the right hand side there'll be a second photo taken on the same day at the same time that hasn't been curated, where the wind's blowing her hair into her face and she's got a double chin and you can actually see that she's got a bit of a tummy and, you know, her jumper's a bit a jumper is kind of ridden up around her middle, you know. And what they're doing here is doing a display of authenticity, which, as we know, is so important to younger demographics of consumers. What they're doing is saying they're not denying being beautiful. Let's observe that the beautiful photograph is not absent, it's not removed. But so what they're doing is a kind of sleight of hand. It's kind of like, on the one hand, yes, I'm beautiful. Look at me, this is how beautiful I am. And on the other hand, we all know, don't we, that this is pretend, and so they'll get their audience on side by both being beautiful and saying this beauty is fictional, and that's really quite clever and is kind of a double whammy. And so that's what we're seeing is consumers themselves manipulating this binary opposition of the polished versus the unpolished in order to advance their business interests, and I think brands can learn something from that.
Okay, well, I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much, Rachel. That was a really interesting insight into the semiotics world and the sorts of benefits that you can get out for adopting that approach. I'm certainly very keen to have a look at your book, so I'm sure there's lots to learn from that. Right.
Thank you. On the code again, so if you would kindly, I'm going to get a code that works right now. If you would kindly disseminate that to everybody who's listening. And guys, if you're listening, another way that you can do this is if you contact me directly. My email there is right there on the bottom of the screen. If you contact me directly, I will give you a code straight from my publisher.
That's fantastic. Okay, well, once again, thanks very much, Rachel, for running this webinar for us, and thanks to everybody for joining us. And I hope you all have a wonderful day in the sunshine. Enjoy it while it's the sun is still shining. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.